So we're on day 286 of the special military operations that the Russians refused to call a war. And it is a war, and I wonder if there's a term limit to this. At what point can a special military operation cease to be called that because of time? If anybody knows, I'd like to hear that. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about accurately understanding the count of casualties, and there's been some great feedback that I've gotten over the last few days, and I'm going to show that to you at the end. I'm going to show you all the news of the day, and when we get to the end, I'm going to show that to you about just exactly what, how we interpret or how we think about the casualty rate. But I'm going to start by updating you on some previous stories over the last few days in Ukraine. So, for example, Ukraine's power system is gradually recovering after another massive wave on December 6th, or 5th. It is December 6th today, so they just keep knocking the generation facilities down, and Ukraine keeps building it back up. It's really amazing how efficient the Ukrainians have gotten in restoring electric. Okay, the ISW talked about the strike that the Ukrainians shot into Russia just yesterday, and this was a fascinating story because it went like 200 some odd miles into Russia. It went comparably the distance that you could be to attack Moscow itself, and so that would put the Russians on alert. So Russian forces conducted another wave of missile strikes on Ukraine, we just talked about, but Ukrainian forces likely conducted strikes on two Russian strategic air bases on December 5th, inflicting light damage while demonstrating Ukraine's ability to strike Russia's rear. Okay, so the issue is not the damage that they caused, but that they were able to do that, and that has got to be psychologically really disturbing to Russians. Anger over the Russian military's inability to prevent Ukrainian strikes on Russian strategic air bases over 280 miles from Ukrainian positions outweighed praise for the latest rounds of strikes by the mill blogger community. So this is important for a couple of reasons. One, it's important because it's psychologically in the Russians' head. But two, the Russian mill blogger community, if you don't understand what's going on there are these mill bloggers that are pro-Russian that are kind of pushing Putin, keep being hard on Ukraine, keep putting the pressure on, and they keep doing this. And so Putin is not really, like we say, well, if Putin just decided that, he was done with it, it would be over. He can't actually do that if he wants to stay in power because there's a large group pushing him that direction, and the mill bloggers are part of that community. What's the strike look like? Well, this is the strike, a little video you can watch. You can look this up in The Guardian. A drone attack hits oil storage tank at airfield in Russian Kursk region. But what's important here is that this airfield was 175 miles from the Ukrainian border, and you can see this on Euromaidan Press. It'll have the whole thing. I'm not going to show it just because of YouTube's kind of restrictions. But where is it on the map? So here's Ukraine. Here's the border as far as they could actually kind of occupy or send from. Here's the occupied border, okay, and then here's Engels, and here's the Kursk airfield, and Moscow is within reach. I mean, if you can hit this from your border, you can hit Moscow, and they have to be aware of that. Just another view of this. This is what the damage actually looks like on the oil refinery. You see a house here and the oil tank. It's not really that significant, but just that they were able to do it. That's what's significant. Okay. Now, there's another interesting article here about oil tankers queuing up off Turkey as the price cap on Russian crude escalates. Now, yesterday I described supply and demand and how that works, and OPEC, and if I want to buy a Coke at a certain price, if everybody decided we're not going to buy it for less than this, and I went through all that, and then I got a comment, and it was a great comment. Jeffrey9015 said, "You say half the world isn't in on the price cap," and I did say that. That's right. India, Brazil, all kinds of other countries want this cheap Russian oil, and they're not, going to work together with the G7 on whatever the G7 is trying to do. In fact, the president of Brazil was bragging about, how much oil he's gotten for his country and how great that was, and India was doing the same kind of thing. The enforcement mechanism, he says, is maritime insurance. He's right, of which every single one of the companies capable of insuring oil tankers is based within the G7. I don't think that that's right, and I commented about that below. I think there was an Indian company that was somehow related to, doing that insurance whatever, and there might be, so if somebody else breaks from this, outside the G7, the whole system may fall apart. And that's kind of where I was going with this. But he's right. At least in the near term, he's exactly right that if a country wants to pay more than the price cap, which there's no reason for them to do in the first place, then they have to risk allowing uninsured oil tankers in their waters. No privately owned port on the planet is willing to allow that. So, hey, you might be right, Jeffrey, and I'm willing to be wrong. That's okay. We're learning together. We're growing together. We're going to try to understand this together and be able to unpack this and have these kinds of discussions. So, Jeffrey, you get the gold star. Thank you for your comments. I appreciate that. In other news, Linsky makes a lightning trip to Ukraine's Donbass as battle rages. Zelensky made this working trip to the Donetsk region and to meet with his troops, and he's done this on multiple occasions. As opposed to yesterday, I showed you how Putin was demonstrating his driving abilities as he was driving over the Kerch Bridge into what is heavily controlled Russian territory in Crimea. So there's really no contest between the two leaders. Putin is in the safety of Moscow, away from things, always in safe situations. Zelensky, when he said, like, I have the T-shirt that says that, I need ammunition, not a ride, and that's because, like, wow, you're in harm's way, and we all know that you're really putting yourself on the line. That's a leader right there. That is leadership embodied. You'll see this once in a generation. Okay, let me keep going. Ukraine says embassies in Denmark, Romania receive bloody packages. It's part of that same thing. I asked yesterday if anybody knows anything about why they would send eyeballs. Maybe it was like, the mob sending a calf's head or something along those lines, and that's their variation. I don't know, but it keeps happening, and so we'll keep hearing more about it. Okay, now it's time for some fun with Russian state media. And so here's the first one. Kiev's largest thermal power plant damaged in Russians' rocket attack. Okay, so they're bragging about that they're hitting a power generation station in a number of countries. And they're doing this. Rockets hit targets in Kiev, Odessa, Nikolaev, and they go on without these other things. But what they're doing is they're bragging about what is effectively a war crime, because targeting civilian infrastructure or civilian buildings or whatever is a war crime. The reason that they're targeting this is because they can't actually stop the military on the ground, and I'll prove it. So here we go with another. Kremlin must and will achieve its goals in Ukraine. Yeah, they always say that. But if they could have done it by now, they would have. So they're talking about another wave of mobilization. Remember, this is in Pravda, by the way. Pravda RU. So this is for the Russian audience and for Russian sympathetic kind of audience. So another wave of mobilization? Well, we've already said, the Kremlin spokesman said that such a message is just provocative. As for mobilization, the president's already said everything. Therefore, I don't need to pay attention to this. But I don't think Russia has a chance unless they actually do mobilize. I don't think it's actually possible for them without full mobilization. Russia will lose. I'm pretty convinced of that. Okay, now again, I asked earlier when I was looking at this, so why are they targeting here? And they're targeting here because they can't actually win. So they can't beat the soldiers on the ground. They have to force the government to say uncle and submit. So for the sake of peace in the Donbass, that's what the Russian military correspondent suggests, striking Kyiv at the center. For peace in the Donbass. Well, what does that mean? Until we make mincemeat at the center of Kyiv, the shelling of Donetsk will not stop. Negotiations are not needed, only mincemeat. Okay? Negotiations are useless and persuasion even more so, he said. Now, why? Because you have to get the government in Kyiv to say uncle, and the only way that they think that they're going to do that is to shell Kyiv. Now, if they do shell Kyiv, do you think that they're going to act any different than Londoners did during the Blitz? Of course, Londoners were just, they're ready to fight back even more. So this is not a method that's going to get them to actually capitulate. You have to force one army or the other on the battlefield to capitulate, and for my money, it will be the Russians that fold first. Russian defense minister announces Ukraine's losses. Now, this is what I announced at the very beginning. Okay, so this is really interesting because speaking about Ukraine's losses, Shoigu, that's the commander of the army in Russia, who has never actually been in the army, he was like an engineer or something. Shoigu said that the armed forces of Ukraine lost over 8,300 soldiers in November, just in November. Okay, so let's do some quick math. 8,300 times 9 months, and it's a rough cut, but that would be 74,700. Now, he's not talking about killed and and casualties generally. Generally speaking, they just talk about killed numbers. So that would say that there were 74,700 Ukrainians killed, and then there's generally a multiple of like 3 or something along those lines, and that is going to give us a rough cut about how many. So if you multiply that plus another 200,000 plus that, and then you have about what they say or what they think that Ukraine has lost. That's nonsense. Now, yesterday, I was reading the feedback, and I got a lot of really interesting feedback about this. Why did Russia attack Ukraine's power grid? But I got to talking about Ukraine's statement about 13,000 killed total. Now, that's 13,000 killed total as opposed to what the Russians said about 8,000 killed just in November. So somebody's wrong somewhere. But I got to some great feedback, and I said, look, I'm not exactly sure what it is. I'm not on the ground. I'm not a military expert. I'm just trying to make sense of what's going on here. So here I had some great comments. So here I'm going to highlight some of them. On casualties, the Ukrainians have actual body armor, training, and equipment, says Sid Sinner, and equipment, including field medicine. The Ukrainians have a skilled NCO corps that allows individual units the latitude to make choices and keep their soldiers safe. The Ukrainians don't view their troops as single use. That's really true. The Russians like just go out there and be a target. Ukrainians use satellites, drones, etc. to choose their battles wisely rather than attacking everywhere blindly or just keep attacking at Bakhmut because some general back there said just keep attacking Bakhmut. This type of casualty ratio really shouldn't be unexpected. So what the argument there is that the Ukrainians have a killed casualty ratio that is much higher than 1 to 3. Maybe it is 1 killed for every 7. I don't know. And if that's the case, then that really changes the dynamics. So that's really interesting. And so here is ASDFGH, I don't know, well, just a bunch of letters, 1806. Those casualty numbers, dead, actually sound reasonable. 90,000 versus 13,000 Russians. Soviets had 7 to 8 to 1 killed for every ratio every time that they fought a competent enemy. So if the Russians have a larger killed ratio the other way, and the Ukrainians have a larger casualty ratio, right? Could be. I don't know. I'm trying to present you truth. I am trying to show you as much insight as I can see, but I don't have the corner of the market on truth. So I'm just presenting, and you're going to have to decide. Okay, Hotsky83, as a Ukrainian who's been living in Canada for a while, my guess would be that it's lowballed for a number of obvious reasons, just like Russia does, or that it only includes the bodies of killed soldiers that have been returned to the family members. Now, that's really interesting, including what we can actually count as killed. That might be part of it too. But look, this ratio issue may be a big part of it as well. So when we're talking about the ratio, there's a ratio of about 3 to 1 as a just standard statistical kind of figure. Here are U.S. military casualties of war going back as far as the American Revolution. Okay, now watch this. Here's the wounded. Here's the total of deaths, combat and other. But we're going to go total of deaths, and then we're going to go wounded. Let's go down the line, and we'll look at World War II. You had 116,000 killed, and you had 200,000 wounded. That was bad, right? Then we have World War II, and it's kind of even worse. 405,000 deaths and 670 wounded. So it's very, very bad. But then you get over here to Vietnam and Korea. Korea is about a multiple of 3 to 1. That's a normal kind of multiple. You have Vietnam, you have about a 3 to 1 kind of multiple, right? 58,000 and 153,000. That's a rough cut, but that's right. But then look what happened when you get down to the war in Afghanistan. 2,000 deaths and 20,000 wounded. Now, why is that such a high ratio? It's because you're able to get those people flown in or out very quickly. You're able to stabilize. They have body armor. They have all those kinds of things. So let's go back to my comments and see some more. So I heard somewhere that the dead to injured ratio may be as high as 1 to 8 due to quick frontline medical response. So 13,000 dead still gives 100,000 injured. Might be Ryan Macbeth video. I haven't seen this particular video, but there might be something to it, Greg. I just don't know. And so there's a number of your comments on here, and I read all the comments, and thank you very much for providing them. I'm trying to help you understand what's going on because you're the kind of person who have self-selected to watch this video because you care about Ukraine, and I'm grateful that you're willing to watch. Thank you for your time. If you have any other comments, please provide them. I'm more than happy to learn and grow and be corrected. If I'm wrong, I want to know that I'm wrong. Thank you for your time. See you tomorrow.